Captain Jake Henderson stared at the screen in front of him and felt his stomach drop. The stars outside the window looked completely wrong. He had been flying transport ships for 15 years, and he knew the space routes like the back of his hand. This was not where they were supposed to be. The ship was called Horizon's Edge, and it carried 200 people who wanted to start new lives on a colony world. There were families with children, teachers, farmers, doctors, and engineers. They had all paid good money for safe passage to the outer colonies. Now Jake had to tell them they were lost. Lieutenant Amy Garcia sat at the navigation station checking the numbers again and again. Her face showed that she did not like what she was seeing. Amy was young but very good at her job. If she looked worried, then there was a real problem. Jake walked over to her station and spoke quietly so the other crew members would not panic. He asked her where they were and how far off course the ship had jumped. Amy looked up at him with concern in her eyes. She told him they were 40 light years away from where they should be. She also said there was a planet nearby that her sensors showed could support human life. Before Jake could respond, Chief Engineer Greg Matthews called out from his station. Greg was a big man with strong hands and a loud voice. He had been working on ships since he was 16 years old. When Greg said there was a problem with the engines, people listened. Greg explained that the jump drive was broken. Something had gone very wrong during their last jump through space. He said he could fix it, but it would take at least 2 months, maybe 3. They could not jump again until the repairs were done. The ship could fly normally through space, but that would not help them. The nearest human colony was years away at regular speed. Jake made a decision. He told Amy to scan the nearby planet. If it had air they could breathe and water they could drink, they would land there and make camp while Greg fixed the drive. There was no other choice. They did not have enough supplies to wait in space for 3 months. The scan results came back good. The planet had oxygen, water, plants, and a climate similar to Earth. Amy said the temperature was comfortable and there were no dangerous radiation levels. It looked perfect for a temporary camp. Jake gave the order to descend. What Jake and his crew did not know was that the planet was already home to intelligent life. The people who lived there called themselves the Zelnari, and they had been watching Earth's television and radio signals for 50 years. They knew about humans. They had been expecting humans to visit their world someday. They just had not expected them to arrive like this without warning or permission. The Zelnari were very different from humans. They were tall and thin, with skin that changed colors based on their emotions. They lived in beautiful cities with tall towers and flowing architecture. But the most important difference was in how they thought about doing things. The Zelnari loved rules and procedures. They had committees for everything. If you wanted to start a business, you needed to fill out 17 different forms and wait 6 months for approval. If you wanted to build a house, you needed permission from 5 different government offices. Even simple things like planting a garden required paperwork. In the capital city, a Zelnari official named Administrator Trelvax watched the human ship descend on his monitoring screen. He had worked in government for 30 years and had never seen anything like this. Ships did not just land on inhabited planets without asking permission first. It was against every rule and custom. His assistant stood next to him, her skin flashing colors of surprise and confusion. She said the humans were landing without filing any contact forms. Trelvax could not believe it. He told her that no intelligent species would approach a populated world without first requesting an audience with the proper authorities. The humans must not know the Zelnari were there. The Horizon's Edge touched down in a large clearing near a lake. The location was about 20 kilometers from the nearest Zelnari town. Jake chose it because it had fresh water and flat ground. He had no idea anyone lived nearby. As soon as the ship landed, Jake gathered everyone together and explained the situation. He told them they would be staying on the planet for 2 or 3 months while the crew repaired the jump drive. He asked everyone to remain calm and work together. The colonists took the news well. They were relieved to be out of the cramped ship and on solid ground again. Within hours, the humans began setting up their temporary home. They unpacked prefabricated buildings from the ship's cargo hold and started putting them together. The structures were simple but functional, with walls, roofs, and basic furniture. By evening of the first day, they had housing for everyone. On the second day, the colonists started farming. They had seeds and tools, and the soil near the lake was rich and dark. The farmers among them immediately recognized good land when they saw it. They cleared a field and began planting vegetables and grain. If they were going to be here for months, they needed fresh food. By the third day, the human settlement looked like a small town. There were rows of houses, a central area for meetings, a medical clinic, a workshop for repairs, and fields of newly planted crops. The children played by the lake while adults worked on various projects. Everyone stayed busy. Dr. Lisa Park was the ship's doctor. She had set up the medical clinic and was treating a little girl who had scraped her knee while playing. Lisa was putting a bandage on the wound when she noticed something moving at the edge of the forest. 3 figures emerged from the trees. They were tall, taller than any human, with long limbs and skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Their skin was changing colors slowly, shifting through shades of blue and green. Lisa had never seen anything like them. She stayed calm and pressed the communication button on her wrist device. She spoke quietly into it, calling Jake. She told him they had visitors and suggested he come to the medical clinic right away. She kept her voice steady and friendly. She did not want to frighten the aliens or the children. The 3 Zelnari stopped at the edge of the settlement and stood there, watching. They seemed uncertain about what to do next. Their skin colors shifted to lighter shades, which Lisa would later learn meant they were feeling nervous. Jake arrived within minutes, along with Amy and several other crew members. They approached the Zelnari slowly and peacefully. Jake raised his hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of greeting. He smiled, trying to look friendly and non-threatening. The Zelnari looked at each other, their colors shifting rapidly. Then the one in the middle stepped forward. He was carrying what looked like an official document and wearing formal robes. He began to speak in a language the humans could not understand. Amy quickly activated her translator device. The small machine analyzed the Zelnari language and began converting it to English. The voice that came out was mechanical but clear. The Zelnari was introducing himself as a representative of the local government. He was reciting what sounded like a very formal speech about protocols and procedures. Jake waited patiently for the speech to end. When it finally did, he introduced himself and explained their situation. He told the Zelnari about the broken drive and how they needed to stay for a few months to fix it. He apologized for landing without permission and said they meant no harm. He offered to trade goods or services in exchange for being allowed to stay. The Zelnari representative's skin flashed bright orange, which the translator noted meant surprise or shock. He said that trade agreements required filing Form 47 Alpha with multiple government offices. He began listing all the steps needed before any trade could happen. Jake listened with growing confusion. He just wanted to know if they could stay. He did not understand why everything needed so many forms and approvals. He told the Zelnari that they could just help each other out as neighbors. No complicated paperwork needed. The Zelnari looked at Jake as if he had said something completely impossible. His skin flashed through several colors rapidly. The translator was having trouble keeping up with all the emotional signals. Finally, the Zelnari said he would need to report this to his superiors and return with proper instructions. Then he and the other 2 Zelnari turned and walked back into the forest. Jake watched them go and turned to Amy. He said he had a feeling this was going to be more complicated than just fixing the ship. Amy agreed. She had noticed how formal and rule-focused the aliens seemed. She wondered if their society was built entirely around bureaucracy. That night, the humans held a meeting to discuss their new neighbors. They decided to continue working on their camp and the ship repairs. They would be friendly and helpful to the Zelnari, but would not let paperwork slow them down. They had families to take care of and work to do. The Zelnari could file whatever forms they needed. The humans would just keep moving forward. Nobody realized it yet, but this simple difference in approach was about to change everything for both species. Administrator Trelvac spent 3 full days writing the official first contact message. In Zelnari culture, first contact with a new species was extremely important. There were rules that had been followed for thousands of years. The message needed to reference 17 different traditional protocols. It needed signatures from 4 different government departments. It needed to be reviewed by the Historical Council to ensure it matched previous first contact events. While Trelvax worked on his message, the humans built more houses. They expanded their farming fields. They set up a water purification system. They created a school for the children. By the time Trelvax was ready to send his official delegation, the human settlement looked like a permanent town. The delegation finally arrived at the human camp on a bright morning. There were 12 Zelnari in total, all wearing formal robes in traditional colors. They carried ceremonial banners and sang ancient greeting songs as they walked. Everything was done according to the proper customs. Jake met them at the edge of camp. He was wearing his regular work clothes, jeans, and a shirt. There was a coffee stain on his collar from breakfast. He smiled warmly and held out his hand for a handshake. He greeted them in a friendly, casual way. Trelvac stared at the extended hand. According to the protocols, there should be an exchange of formal credentials first. Then both sides should recite their family histories. Then there should be a ceremonial exchange of gifts from each homeworld. The handshake was not part of any protocol he knew. Trelvax introduced himself with his full title and began explaining which protocol covered their situation. He started reading from his prepared statement about accidental contact and the proper procedures that needed to be followed. He had barely finished the introduction when Jake interrupted him. Jake thanked him but said they could keep things simple. He explained again about the broken ship and said they would leave as soon as it was fixed. He asked if there was anything they could trade. He mentioned that they had good manufacturing equipment and could make useful items. He said they also had skilled workers who could help with projects. Trelvax felt his skin flicker through several colors of distress. Trade required forms. Manufacturing required permits. Helping with projects required approval from the Labor Allocation Committee. There were proper channels for all of these things. You could not just do them. He tried to explain this to Jake. He told him about Form 47 Alpha that was needed for any trade. He explained that the form needed to go to the Bureau of External Commerce. Then it needed approval from the Committee for Fair Exchange. Then it needed a signature from the Minister of Resource Allocation. The process usually took about 4 months. Jake looked confused. He asked why they needed so many approvals just to help each other. He said they were neighbors now and neighbors helped each other. No forms were necessary. They could just figure things out as they went along. Before Trelvax could respond, a human child ran up to them. The child was holding a bright yellow flower she had picked from the meadow. She looked up at Trelvax with wide, curious eyes. She said he looked pretty and handed him the flower. Then she laughed and ran back to her friends. Trelvax held the flower and watched the child run away. He looked at the busy human settlement around him. Everyone was working, but they also seemed happy. Children played while adults built things. People stopped to talk and laugh with each other. There was no formal structure, no obvious hierarchy, just organized chaos that somehow worked. Over the following weeks, more Zelnari came to observe the humans. They were fascinated by how quickly the humans did things. When the humans needed more water, they just built another purification system. They did not form a committee to study whether more water was needed. They did not file requests for construction permits. They identified a problem and fixed it. When the humans needed more space for their growing food production, they simply cleared more land and planted more crops.
In Zelnari society, this would require approval from the Land Use Committee, the Agricultural Planning Board, and the Environmental Impact Council.
The process would take at least 6 months. The humans did it in a week. One day, an elderly Zelnari named Kelnix wandered into the human settlement. He was in pain from an old injury that had never healed properly. In Zelnari society, getting medical treatment required filling out health assessment forms and waiting for an appointment with the Medical Allocation Committee. Kelnix had been waiting for 3 months. Dr. Lisa Park saw him limping and immediately invited him into her clinic. She asked him what was wrong. He explained about his injury and the constant pain. Lisa examined him, used her medical scanner, and determined the problem. She gave him medicine and used a healing device on the injury. The whole process took less than an hour. When Kelnix walked out of the clinic, he was pain-free for the first time in years. He could not believe it. He walked back to his village and told everyone what had happened. The human doctor had just helped him. No forms, no waiting, no committees. She saw he needed help and she helped him. The story spread quickly among the Zelnari. More of them started visiting the human settlement when they had problems. A farmer came because his irrigation system was broken. The repair request had been submitted to the Public Works Committee 2 months earlier, but nothing had happened yet. A human engineer named Rick Chen looked at the system, identified the problem, and fixed it that same afternoon. 2 neighbors came to the settlement because they had a dispute about their property line. The disagreement had been in mediation for 2 years. A human named Karen Wright listened to both sides for an hour and helped them reach a compromise they both accepted. The whole thing was settled in one meeting. The humans were not trying to cause problems. They were just being themselves. They saw people who needed help and they helped them. It was that simple. But every time they solved a problem quickly, it made the Zelnari system look slow and inefficient. Trelvax watched all of this with growing concern. His people were starting to question the old ways. At council meetings, representatives asked uncomfortable questions. Why did everything take so long? Why did simple tasks require so much paperwork? Why could the humans do in days what took the Zelnari months? He tried to explain that the humans had procedures too. They just moved through them faster. But deep down, he was starting to wonder if that was really true. Maybe the humans just did not have as many unnecessary steps. Maybe the Zelnari system had become too complicated over the centuries. One evening, Trelvax visited Jake at the human settlement. He found the captain sitting by the lake watching the sunset. Jake invited him to sit down and offered him something to drink. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Trelvax asked Jake how humans made decisions so quickly. Jake thought about it for a moment. He said that humans usually ask themselves a few simple questions. Is there a real problem? Can we fix it? Will fixing it hurt anyone? If the answers were yes, yes, and no, then they just went ahead and fixed it. They did not need permission to do the right thing. Trelvax said that in his society, everything needed permission. Even helping someone required following proper channels. Jake asked why that was. Trelvax realized he did not have a good answer. The rules existed because they had always existed. They were tradition, but maybe tradition was not always the best reason to do something. As the weeks passed, the relationship between the two species grew stronger. The humans learned about Zelnari history and culture. The Zelnari learned about human practical thinking and problem-solving. Children from both species played together. Adults worked on projects together. But underneath the friendship, something bigger was happening. The Zelnari were starting to change. Young people especially began to question why they needed permission for everything. If humans could just do things, why could not they? A young Zelnari named Krelmak made a bold decision. He had always wanted to make tools and sell them. Under the old system, starting a business required 6 months of paperwork and approval from multiple committees. Instead of filing the forms, Krelmak simply set up a shop in his village and started making tools. When the local administrator told him he needed permits, Krelmak replied that he was just helping his neighbors by making things they needed. The administrator insisted he was breaking the rules. Krelmak looked at him and said something that would be remembered for a long time. He said if the rules stopped people from helping each other, then maybe the rules were wrong. That statement spread through Zelnari society like fire through dry grass. Maybe the rules were wrong. Maybe the system could be better. Maybe they could learn from the humans. Trelvax found himself at the center of a growing movement for change. His people were not angry or rebellious. They were simply tired of waiting. They had seen a different way of doing things and they wanted to try it. They wanted to be able to help each other without drowning in paperwork. The humans had no idea they were causing a revolution. They were too busy fixing their ship and living their lives. But their simple approach to problems was transforming an entire civilization. And it had all happened because they treated their alien neighbors the same way they would treat anyone else, with kindness, directness, and a willingness. 4 months after the humans arrived, Administrator Trelvax faced the biggest crisis of his career. Not a war, not a natural disaster, but something much more difficult to handle. His people were questioning everything about their society. At the weekly council meeting, representatives from different regions brought complaint after complaint. A teacher asked why it took 6 months to approve a new school building when the humans had built one in 3 weeks. A merchant wanted to know why opening a small shop required 17 different forms when humans just opened shops whenever they wanted. Trelvax tried to defend the system. He said the humans had procedures too. They just moved faster. But even as he said it, he knew it was not entirely true. He had visited the human settlement many times now. He had watched how they made decisions. They really did just identify problems and solve them. One council member stood up and described his visit to the human camp. He had asked Captain Henderson about the approval process for their water treatment facility. Jake had looked confused by the question. He had said that Greg needed clean water for everyone, so he built the system. That was the entire decision process. One person saw a need and filled it. No committees, no approval forms, no waiting. The council chamber became very quiet. The idea was strange and frightening to them. What would happen if people could just do things without getting approval from committees? Would there be chaos? Would society fall apart? Or would things actually work better? Meanwhile, Jake Henderson had problems of his own. The ship repairs were taking longer than Greg had predicted. They were running low on some important supplies. Jake explained this to Trelvax and asked for help. Trelvax said he would bring the matter to the Emergency Supply Allocation Board at their next meeting, which was in 3 weeks. Jake could not believe what he was hearing. 3 weeks was too long. They needed food now. There were children in the camp who were hungry. How could getting emergency food take 3 weeks? Trelvax looked uncomfortable but explained that emergency protocols had to be followed. There were proper channels even for emergencies. The form still needed to be filed and reviewed. Jake thanked him but walked away shaking his head. That evening, Amy Garcia came to Jake with an idea. She suggested they just grow more food themselves. They had machines that could make farming equipment. There was plenty of unused land around their settlement. They could expand their farms and grow everything they needed. Jake pointed out that the land belonged to the Zelnari. They could not just take it. Amy agreed but said they could ask permission. She thought most Zelnari would be happy to let them use land that was just sitting empty anyway. The next day, Amy walked to the nearest Zelnari village. She explained the situation to the villagers. The humans needed more food. Could they use some of the common land to grow crops? The villagers agreed immediately. They said the land had been unused for years. The humans were welcome to farm it. Then one of the villagers asked if the humans could teach them better farming methods. The Zelnari farms were not producing as much food as they used to. The Agricultural Improvement Committee had been studying the problem for 2 years, but had not found any solutions yet. Maybe the humans knew some tricks that could help. Within a week, human farmers were working side by side with Zelnari farmers. The humans showed them new planting techniques, better irrigation methods, and more efficient harvesting tools. The Zelnari had good technology and deep knowledge about their planet. They just had never thought to experiment with new methods without forming a committee to study them first. The humans approached farming the same way they approached everything else. They tried things, and if something did not work, they tried something different. They learned from mistakes instead of spending months trying to avoid making any mistakes at all. This way of thinking was completely new to the Zelnari, and they found it exciting. The cultural exchange went both ways. The Zelnari taught the humans about their planet's unique ecosystem. They explained which plants were safe to eat and which ones to avoid. They shared their deep knowledge of weather patterns and seasonal changes. They introduced human children to traditional Zelnari art and music, but with every interaction the same pattern emerged. The humans were willing to act while the Zelnari wanted to deliberate. The humans saw this as being practical and efficient. The Zelnari were starting to see their own approach as being overly cautious and slow. The situation came to a head when young Krelmak opened his tool-making business without permission. Other young Zelnari followed his example. Someone started a restaurant without waiting for approval. Someone else began offering tutoring services. Someone opened a repair shop. Local administrators tried to shut these businesses down. They explained that proper procedures had not been followed. The young Zelnari refused to close. They said they were providing useful services to their communities. They were helping their neighbors. Why should that require permission? The administrators brought the matter to the regional council. The council discussed it for days. Traditional members argued that the rules must be followed. Younger members argued that the rules were holding everyone back. The debate was intense. Finally, Trelvax stood up to speak. Everyone in the chamber fell silent. He was respected as a defender of tradition. They expected him to side with the conservatives and demand that the rules be enforced. Instead, Trelvax talked about what he had learned from the humans. He said he had spent 30 years of his life drowning in paperwork. He had watched important projects die because they could not get through the approval process. He had seen people give up on good ideas because the bureaucracy was too difficult to navigate. He said the humans had shown them something important. Rules should serve the people, not the other way around. Procedures should make things work better, not make everything slower. Maybe it was time to change their system. Maybe they could keep the thoughtfulness and care of their traditions while also embracing the directness and practicality of human culture. The speech changed everything. The council voted to reform their governmental system. They would not abandon all their protocols and procedures, but they would simplify them dramatically. They would remove unnecessary steps. They would give people more freedom to act without waiting for approval. The changes happened gradually. Emergency decisions that used to take weeks now took hours. Starting a business went from a 6-month process to a 1-week process. Helping your neighbor no longer required filling out forms. People could just help each other. Not everyone was happy about the changes. Some older Zelnari felt that their culture was being destroyed. They believed the old ways were better, even if they were slower. A group of traditionalists decided to establish their own community in a different part of the planet, where they could maintain the old system. Jake made sure the traditionalists got all the supplies and support they needed. He understood that not everyone wanted change. Some people were comfortable with the old ways, and that was okay. There was room on the planet for different approaches. Similarly, some humans struggled with certain aspects of Zelnari culture. The aliens still insisted on careful discussion and consensus building for major decisions. Some humans found this frustrating. They were used to making quick decisions and moving on. Amy often had to mediate between impatient humans and methodical Zelnari, but slowly, both groups learned from each other. The humans learned the value of stopping to think before acting on major issues. The Zelnari learned that not every decision needed a committee meeting. Together, they were creating something new, a hybrid culture that combined the best of both approaches. The human children and Zelnari children became close friends. They played together, learned together, and grew up seeing both cultures as normal. To them, there was no conflict between human directness and Zelnari thoughtfulness. They just used whichever approach worked best for each situation. 6 months after landing, Jake realized something surprising. He did not want to leave anymore. None of the colonists did. They had built something special here. They had homes, friends, meaningful work, and a sense of purpose. This was not a temporary camp anymore. It was home, but the decision was not theirs alone to make. This was the Zelnari planet. If the aliens wanted them to leave once the ship was repaired, then they would have to go. Jake knew he needed to have a serious conversation with Trelvax about the future. The question was not whether they could stay, but whether they should. 8 months after landing on the planet, Chief Engineer Greg Matthews made an announcement that should have been good news. The jump drive was finally fixed. The ship could leave whenever they wanted. They could continue to their original destination or return to human space. Jake expected everyone to celebrate. Instead, people looked worried and sad. That evening, he called a town meeting to discuss their next steps. He was surprised when nearly everyone showed up. Usually only a few dozen people came to meetings. This time the meeting hall was completely full. Amy stood up first. She said that many colonists did not want to leave. They had built lives here. They had homes, farms, businesses, and friends. Their children played with Zelnari children every day. They had become part of this community. Leaving would mean abandoning everything they had created. Dr. Lisa Park spoke next. She explained that she had been training 12 Zelnari in human medical techniques. They were good students and were becoming excellent doctors. They just needed encouragement to be creative and try new approaches. If the humans left now, those doctors might go back to the old slow system. The training would be wasted. Other people shared similar stories. The farmers had established partnerships with Zelnari farmers. The teachers were running a school that taught both human and Zelnari children. The engineers were working on long-term projects with Zelnari technicians. Everyone had connections and commitments, but Jake reminded them of an important fact. This was not their planet. They had landed here by accident. The Zelnari had been kind and welcoming, but that did not give humans the right to stay permanently. They needed to ask permission, and they needed to be prepared to accept no as an answer. The colonists agreed. They decided to request a formal meeting with the Zelnari Council. They would explain their situation honestly. They would ask if they could stay. If the Zelnari said no, then the humans would leave peacefully and be grateful for the time they had spent there. Jake went to see Trelvax the next morning. He found the administrator in his office, surrounded by much less paperwork than usual. The governmental reforms had made Trelvax's job both easier and more interesting. He actually had time to think about important matters now, instead of just processing forms all day. Jake explained that the ship was repaired. He said the colonists had held a meeting and many of them wanted to stay, but he made it clear that this was the Zelnari planet and the Zelnari decision. He asked if the council would be willing to discuss the possibility of humans establishing a permanent settlement. Trelvax was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would bring the matter to the Council of Harmonious Integration. He could not promise what they would decide, but he would make sure the request was heard fairly. The council met 3 days later. In the old system, such an important decision would have taken months of debate. Under the new system, they were able to discuss and vote in less than a week. Representatives came from all over the planet to participate. The debate was intense. Some council members argued that allowing humans to stay permanently would change Zelnari society too much. They said the humans had already transformed their culture dramatically in just 8 months. What would happen if they stayed for years or decades? Other council members pointed out that the changes had been good. Citizens were happier. Problems were being solved faster. The economy was growing. People felt more free to pursue their dreams and help their neighbors. Yes, the culture had changed, but it had changed for the better. One representative told a story about her daughter. The girl had always wanted to be an artist but had been discouraged because getting approval to study art took years and cost too much. After meeting human artists who just created art without asking permission, the daughter had started painting. Now she was talented and happy, selling her work and teaching other young Zelnari. Another representative talked about his village's medical clinic. Before the humans arrived, people waited months for treatment. Now with Zelnari doctors trained by Dr. Park, people got help within days. Lives had been saved because of faster medical care. After 2 days of discussion, the council took a vote. The result was not even close. 80% of the council voted to invite the humans to stay permanently. They would be offered citizenship with full rights and responsibilities. But there was one condition. The council wanted to restructure the government to make the cultural fusion official. They proposed creating a hybrid system that combined Zelnari thoughtfulness with human practicality, and they wanted Jake Henderson to serve as co-administrator alongside Trelvax. When Trelvax came to deliver the news, Jake was stunned. He had hoped they would be allowed to stay. He had never imagined they would be asked to help run the planet. He told Trelvax he needed to discuss this with the colonists before accepting. That night's town meeting was even more crowded than the last one. Jake explained the council's offer. The humans could stay, but they would have real responsibility for the planet's future. Some people would need to serve in government positions. Everyone would be expected to help build and maintain the hybrid society. The colonists discussed the offer for hours. Some were excited about the opportunity. Others felt it was too much responsibility. A few wanted to continue to their original destination as planned. This was not what they had signed up for when they left Earth. Finally, they voted. 147 colonists chose to stay and become citizens of the Zelnari world. 53 preferred to leave and continue their original journey. Both groups respected each other's decisions. Jake made arrangements for the Horizon's Edge to transport the departing colonists to the nearest human outpost. From there, they could get passage to the outer colonies. The ship would then return to serve as a ferry, bringing supplies and occasional new settlers from human space. The day the ship left was emotional. Families said goodbye to friends. People who had worked together for months hugged and promised to stay in touch. Some children cried because their playmates were leaving. But everyone understood that people had different dreams and different needs. Those who stayed got to work building their permanent home. The settlement expanded into a proper town with better houses, paved streets, and public buildings. Human and Zelnari architects worked together to design structures that combined practical human design with beautiful Zelnari aesthetics. The government reforms continued. The Council of Harmonious Integration kept its traditional name but operated in a new way. Some matters still required careful discussion and consensus, but routine decisions could be made quickly. Emergency situations got immediate attention. The system found a balance between thoughtfulness and action. Jake found himself working closely with Trelvax every day. They made a good team. Trelvax understood the deep history and complex social structures of Zelnari society. Jake brought practical problem-solving skills and a different perspective. Together, They could see issues from multiple angles and find solutions that worked for everyone. Amy became the head of the new education department. She oversaw schools that taught both species together, combining human and Zelnari knowledge. The children who grew up in these schools were completely comfortable with both cultures. They switched between human directness and Zelnari formality as naturally as breathing. Dr. Lisa Park established a medical institute that trained doctors from both species. Her teaching method emphasized creativity and quick thinking, while also respecting Zelnari thoroughness and attention to detail. The graduates of her program became known throughout the region as excellent physicians. Greg Matthews worked with Zelnari engineers to combine human manufacturing techniques with Zelnari advanced materials. They created technologies that neither species could have developed alone. Other planets started requesting their innovations. Not everything went smoothly. There were still disagreements and cultural misunderstandings. Sometimes humans acted too quickly and made mistakes. Sometimes Zelnari moved too slowly and missed opportunities. But both groups learned to communicate their concerns and work through problems together. A year after the decision to stay, the settlement had grown into a city. The population was now over 1,000 humans and several thousand Zelnari, who had moved there from other regions. The city had a name that both species agreed on. They called it Haven. Jake stood on a balcony overlooking Haven one evening. Amy joined him with 2 cups of tea, a Zelnari custom they had all adopted. They watched the sun set over their city. Below them, humans and Zelnari walked the streets together, working, talking, and living side by side. Amy asked if he ever wondered what would have happened if they had reached their original destination. Jake thought about it. They would have been just another group of colonists on an established world. They would have followed someone else's rules and lived ordinary lives. He told Amy he did not regret anything. They had gotten lost and found something better. They were not just living on someone else's planet. They were building a new kind of society together. That was worth more than any planned destination could have been. 2 years after the Horizon's Edge first landed, Jake Henderson found himself standing before the Galactic Community Council. It was a huge chamber filled with representatives from dozens of different alien species. He was there to explain how he had accidentally colonized an inhabited planet. A delegate from the Centauri system spoke first. She had 3 eyes that blinked one at a time. She said she wanted to make sure she understood the situation correctly. The humans had crash-landed on an occupied world. They had set up a permanent settlement without permission. They had changed the local government structure. And despite all this, the natives had not only allowed it, but had asked the humans to help run their civilization. Jake admitted that when she put it that way, it sounded bad. The delegate said it sounded impossible. She explained that the Zelnari were famous throughout the sector for following rules strictly. They had once spent 10 years negotiating a trade agreement over decorative crystals. How could such a rigid society accept humans changing everything in just a few months? Administrator Trelvax had come with Jake to the hearing. He stood up to speak. His skin displayed the formal colors that Zelnari used for official testimony. He said the delegate was right about the old Zelnari society. They had been paralyzed by their own procedures. Every problem needed a committee. Every committee needed approval. Every approval needed documentation. Nothing could happen without permission, and permission was almost impossible to get. Then the humans arrived, Trelvax explained. They just did things. They saw problems and solved them. They met people who needed help and helped them. They did not ask permission because it never occurred to them that simply helping would be wrong. They were not trying to be disrespectful. They were just being themselves. At first, Trelvax said, the Zelnari were shocked. The humans were breaking every rule and ignoring every protocol. But then something interesting happened. Things started getting better. Citizens who interacted with humans were happier. Communities that adopted some human methods saw improvements in quality of life. The evidence was impossible to ignore. The humans did not conquer the Zelnari, Trelvax continued. They did not even try to change them. They simply showed by example that there was another way to live. The Zelnari chose to learn from them. It was a free choice made by a free people. The council chamber filled with the sound of various aliens talking to each other. Some delegates looked skeptical. Others seemed curious. The Centauri delegate spoke again. She said that what Captain Henderson had done would be considered cultural imperialism by most species. The fact that the Zelnari welcomed it did not change what it was. Dr. Lisa Park asked permission to speak. She had been invited as an expert witness. She disagreed with calling it imperialism. Imperialism meant dominance and control. The humans had none of that. They had been stranded and desperate. They needed help and offered help in return. Everything after that was mutual choice. Lisa explained that the Zelnari were not weak or primitive. They were sophisticated and educated. They had impressive technology and deep knowledge. They simply had different values. When they saw human values in action, they chose to adopt some of them, but they also kept their own traditions and ways. The exchange went both ways. A delegate from another species asked for examples. Lisa said that the Zelnari had taught humans patience. Humans tended to rush into solutions without thinking about long-term effects. Working with the Zelnari, they learned to balance quick action with careful thought. The hybrid government now used what they called thoughtful urgency. Emergency decisions could be made fast, but with proper consideration. At the same time, Lisa said, humans showed the Zelnari that not everything needed to be an emergency. Sometimes you could make a decision and just move forward. The old system treated every choice as equally important. Human influence helped them understand which matters needed extensive discussion and which could be handled quickly. Over the next 3 days, more people testified. Amy Garcia described the educational programs where children from both species learned together. Greg Matthews explained how they shared technology. Krelmak, the young Zelnari entrepreneur, talked about the economic growth that came from reducing bureaucracy. What emerged was a clear picture. This was not conquest or domination. It was accidental partnership. Two very different species had been thrown together by chance. They learned from each other and built something new together. Both sides benefited. Both sides changed. Both sides grew. After all the testimony was heard, the council deliberated. The chamber was tense as everyone waited for the verdict. Finally, the Centauri delegate stood to deliver the judgment. She said that the council found Captain Henderson had violated several first contact protocols. However, his actions did not constitute colonization or cultural imperialism as defined by galactic law. The relationship between humans and Zelnari appeared to be genuinely mutual and beneficial to both parties. However, she continued in a stern voice, this set a dangerous precedent. The fact that accidental integration worked in this case did not mean such approaches should be repeated. Other species might not be as adaptable as the Zelnari. Captain Henderson would receive a formal warning and would be required to complete certified training in first contact, protocols before commanding any vessel that might encounter new species. Jake accepted the judgment with relief. He had been worried they might force the humans to leave the planet. A warning and some training classes were nothing compared to that. As they left the council chambers, Trelvax's skin flickered with the colors of amusement. He told Jake there was an irony to all this. Their world was now being held up as a model for successful integration. 3 other species had contacted them asking for advice on cultural exchange. Jake laughed. He said they had no idea what they were doing. They were just making things up as they went along. Trelvax said that was exactly what made it work. Humans did not approach situations with rigid ideas about how things should be. They adapted. They improvised. They responded to actual conditions instead of theoretical rules. That was very human. Jake pointed out that it was very un-Zelnari. Trelvax said that was not true anymore. The Zelnari had learned from humans, and humans had learned from the Zelnari. They were becoming something new, something better than either species had been alone. Back on their planet, life continued in Haven and the other mixed communities. Human children learned Zelnari history and meditation. Zelnari youth played human sports and performed in theater groups. Mixed teams worked on projects ranging from agriculture to space exploration. The planet had even gotten a new unofficial name. Humans still called it Kepler 442c in official documents, but locally everyone called it Haven. The name had emerged naturally and both species liked it. It felt like home. 5 years after the accidental landing, the population had grown significantly. Over 1,000 humans now lived on Haven, and the Zelnari population had actually increased as families moved from other regions to join the cultural experiment. The original settlement had expanded into a city that combined human efficiency with Zelnari beauty. Jake eventually stepped down from his role as co-administrator. He handed his responsibilities to a younger generation of leaders from both species. He opened a small restaurant that served fusion cuisine, combining human cooking methods with Zelnari ingredients. It became the most popular place in the city. People came not just for the food but for the atmosphere of friendship and cooperation that Jake fostered. One evening, Amy came to visit him at the restaurant. They sat on the patio, drinking tea and watching the sunset. Amy asked if he ever thought about what would have happened if they had made it to their original destination. Jake considered the question. They would have been just another group of colonists on an established world. They would have followed rules made by others. They would have lived ordinary lives. They probably would have been fine, but nothing special would have happened. He told Amy he never thought about it. Getting lost had led them to something better. They had been looking for a place to belong and accidentally created one. They had not taken over a planet. They had joined one, and that made all the difference. Below them in the plaza, children from both species played together. Their laughter and voices created a sound that belonged to no single culture, but to something entirely new. A Zelnari elder taught human students traditional songs while a human engineer worked with Zelnari apprentices on a water project. This was the truth of what really happened. Not conquest, not colonization, but connection. Two very different peoples had been thrown together by accident. They chose to build something together. They learned each other's strengths and forgave each other's weaknesses. They created a society stronger than either could have built alone. If you asked anyone on Haven, human or Zelnari, whether they would change what happened, the answer was always the same. Not for anything. They had found something precious and rare in the galaxy. They had found true partnership between different species. They had found home. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never planned to reach. Sometimes getting lost is how you find what you were really looking for. And sometimes, just sometimes, accidents lead to miracles. 10 years after the accidental landing, Haven had become famous throughout the galaxy. Other species came to visit and study how humans and Zelnari had built a successful hybrid society. Universities sent researchers. Governments sent observers. Everyone wanted to understand how two such different cultures could merge so peacefully. The planet now hosted exchange programs for many different species. Young aliens came to learn from the Haven experiment. They studied in the mixed schools. They worked in the hybrid government. They saw firsthand that different species could live together and create something better than either could alone. The Horizon's Edge, now fully repaired and upgraded with Zelnari technology, served as a regular ferry between Haven and human space. It brought supplies, mail, and new colonists who wanted to be part of something special. Not everyone who came decided to stay. Some found the cultural mixing uncomfortable, but enough stayed to keep the community growing and changing. Jake's restaurant had become an institution. People came from all over the city to eat there. The menu changed every day based on what ingredients were available and what Jake felt like making. There were no rules or schedules. Customers sat wherever they wanted and often ended up at tables with complete strangers. Human and Zelnari would share meals and stories. Many friendships began in that restaurant. One evening, a young Zelnari woman came into the restaurant looking nervous. She approached Jake and said she was writing a history of Haven for her university project. She wanted to interview him about the early days. Jake agreed and invited her to sit down. He made her a cup of tea and some food. The student asked him what he had been thinking when he decided to land on the planet. Jake laughed and said he had not been thinking much at all. The ship was broken. They needed to land somewhere. The planet looked safe. That was the extent of his decision-making process. There was no grand plan. The student seemed disappointed. She said that historians were calling him a visionary who had foreseen the possibility of human-Zelnari cooperation. Jake told her the historians were wrong. He was just a ship captain who had made an emergency landing. Everything that happened after was accident, luck, and good people trying to do the right thing. She asked what the secret was. How had he convinced the Zelnari to accept such huge changes to their society? Jake said he had not convinced anyone of anything. The Zelnari had convinced themselves. They saw that the human way of doing things worked well for certain situations. They chose to adopt some of those methods. It was their choice, not his. The student asked if he thought other species could create similar partnerships. Jake said he did not know. Every species was different. What worked for humans and Zelnari might not work for others. The important thing was mutual respect and willingness to learn. If both sides approached each other with open minds and good intentions, amazing things could happen. After the student left, Jake sat alone for a while thinking about her questions. He wondered if historians would ever understand that there was no secret formula. There was no master plan. There was just a group of humans who needed help, and a group of Zelnari who were kind enough to provide it. The rest had grown naturally from that foundation of mutual support. Dr. Lisa Park's Medical Institute had grown into a major center for training. Doctors came from dozens of worlds to study there. The Institute's approach to medicine was revolutionary because it drew from many different medical traditions. Students learned human diagnostic techniques, Zelnari preventive care, and methods from several other species. Lisa herself had trained over 200 doctors in the past decade. They had spread throughout the galaxy, taking Haven's collaborative approach with them. Some had opened clinics on other worlds. Others had joined research teams. A few had become medical advisors to planetary governments. All of them carried the lesson that different approaches could work together. One of Lisa's students, a Zelnari named Velkara, had just returned from treating refugees on a war-torn planet. She came to visit Lisa and thank her. Velkara said that the techniques she learned at Haven had saved countless lives. The ability to think creatively and act quickly while still being thorough and careful had made her an effective doctor in difficult conditions. Lisa told her that she had not taught Velkara anything new. She had just given her permission to use abilities she already had. Zelnari were naturally careful and thorough. They just needed to learn they could also be quick when necessary. The combination of their natural talents with human-style urgency made them extraordinary doctors. Administrator Trelvax had retired from government service 5 years earlier. He spent his time writing and teaching. His memoir about the transformation of Zelnari society had become a bestseller across multiple worlds. Educational institutions throughout the galaxy used it as a case study in cultural change and adaptation. In the final chapter of his book, Trelvax had written something that people often quoted. He said that the humans did not conquer the Zelnari. They inspired them. And in being inspired, the Zelnari chose to change. That choice made all the difference. It was never about humans taking over their world. It was about the Zelnari inviting humans to help build a better future together. The younger generation of leaders on Haven was remarkable. They included people born on other worlds who had come to Haven as children and grown up in the hybrid culture. To them, there was no conflict between being human or Zelnari or any other species. They were all citizens of Haven first. One of these young leaders was a human Zelnari couple's adopted daughter named Sophie. Her parents were among the original colonists. She had grown up speaking both languages, celebrating both cultures' holidays and learning from both traditions. Now she served on the Planetary Council and was known for her ability to see issues from multiple perspectives. Sophie came to visit Jake one day to ask his advice about a difficult decision. A corporation from human space wanted to establish a large mining operation on Haven. It would bring jobs and wealth, but would also change the planet significantly. Sophie was torn between the economic benefits and the desire to preserve what made Haven special. Jake listened carefully. Then he asked her what approach would combine human practicality with Zelnari thoughtfulness. Sophie thought about it. She said humans would focus on the immediate benefits. Zelnari would worry about long-term consequences. The hybrid approach would be to seriously consider both. Jake smiled and said she had answered her own question. She knew what to do. She should analyze the proposal thoroughly, but make a decision in a reasonable time frame. She should consider both short-term gains and long-term effects. And most importantly, she should ask the people of Haven what they wanted. That was the real secret of their success, listening to everyone and making decisions together. As the years passed, Haven continued to grow and evolve. New species arrived and added their own cultures to the mix. A small group of insectoid traders established a market district. A family of aquatic beings created an underwater research station in the ocean. Each group brought something unique and each learned from the others. The planet had become a true melting pot, but not in a way that erased individual cultures. Instead, it was a place where different cultures could maintain their identities while also participating in something larger. You could be Zelnari and also be Haven. You could be human and also be Haven. The identities supported each other rather than conflicting. Jake was now in his 60s. His hair had turned gray and he moved a bit slower than before. But he still came to his restaurant every day. He still cooked for customers and listened to their stories. He still believed that the best way to bring people together was to share a meal and talk honestly with each other. One evening, as he was closing the restaurant, a ship landed at the spaceport. It was a new group of human colonists who had heard about Haven and wanted to see it for themselves. They came to Jake's restaurant because everyone told them it was the heart of the community. Jake welcomed them in even though it was past closing time. He made them food and tea. They asked him the same questions everyone asked. How did this happen? How did you build this place? What is the secret? Jake gave them the same answer he always gave. There was no secret. They had been lost and scared. The Zelnari had been kind to them. Both groups had chosen to help each other. They had been honest about their differences and willing to learn from each other. That was all. Everything else had grown from those simple choices. One of the new colonists said it could not be that simple. There must be more to it. Jake shook his head. He said people always wanted complicated explanations for simple things. But the truth was simple. If you treated others with respect and kindness, if you were willing to learn and adapt, if you focused on building together rather than competing, then amazing things could happen. That night after the colonists left, Jake walked home through the quiet streets of Haven. He looked at the buildings that combined human and Zelnari design. He saw the parks where children from multiple species played. He noticed the lights and windows where families were settling down for the evening. This was what they had built. Not through grand plans or brilliant strategies, but through small daily choices to be kind, to help, to learn, and to grow together.